Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Xiaobo Zhang from Peking University and IFPRI.
Thank you, Maxi, for your kind introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID on small and medium enterprises in China based on multi rounds of surveys before and after the shock. And first, present this work at the Paris Institute of Advanced Studies right after the Chinese lockdown in February. And after that, we can continue to do follow-up surveys. So I will report more recent work. SMEs are very important in both developed countries and developing countries. For example, in the United States, small business of patents, 60% of GDP, and 50% of tax revenues. This is what we call 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rules. However, SMEs are vulnerable to shocks. Typically, during the economic slowdown, small business contract earlier and more severely. The recent COVID-19 pandemic is no exception. There are quite a few studies examining the impact of COVID-19 on SMEs, but most of the studies on developed countries, in large because the data are more readily available. In developed countries, information about SMEs is much lacking. As a result, it's much harder to timely and accurately gauge the impact of COVID on SMEs in developed countries. So our study fill in this knowledge gap by using multi-round of surveys before and after the COVID shocks. So mainly we are using two surveys. One is the enterprise survey on innovation and entrepreneurship in China, ESIEC. Another is a survey, it's an online survey of micro and small enterprises, OSOME, in combination with business registration database, which covers all the firms ever registered in China. So this figure shows the timeline of the COVID cases and lockdown. The COVID broke out in the late December 2019. In January, it spread out nationwide. China announced national lockdown right before the Chinese New Year in the late January. The lockdown lasts for more than 2 weeks. And then the Wuhan lockdown was finally ended on March 8th. After that, the life largely returned to normal, although there are still localized lockdowns in response to sporadic outbreaks. Let me first introduce the ESIEC survey. It was led by the Center for Enterprise Research at Peking University and the PI. The sample include private enterprises and self-employed businesses established the past 7 years in 6 provinces, drawing from the National Business Registration Database. We did a few surveys between 2017 and 2019. We successfully interviewed about 10,000 entrepreneurs. After the outbreak of COVID, we immediately started to do a follow-up phone interviews with the previously surveyed ESIEC entrepreneurs. So the first round of survey started on February 10th, right after China announced ending the national lockdown. The second round of survey was conducted in May 2020. The third wave was conducted in August. This year, we did another round of survey this August. So we already have 4 rounds of ESIEC surveys. So this figure displays the 4 round of ESIEC, 3 round of ESIEC surveys in 2020. Another round was done in August this year. Although the sample was drawn from 6 provinces, but the finished sample end up closely resembling the industry distribution and the firm size distribution at the national level. The left figure shows the distribution at the first digit industry level. The dark color represents the economic census data from 2018. The left part stands for the sample distribution from our own survey data. You can see they match quite closely. The right figure displays the sample distributions by firm size. You can see all sample also mirrors closely the economic census data are in the same year. The second survey is jointly conducted by Peking University and the Ant Group Research Institute, starting from the third quarter of 2020 to the third quarter of 2021. The fourth quarter survey is ongoing, so I won't be able to show the result for the latest quarter. The sample was drawn from active users of Alipay, the largest online payment platform owned by Alibaba. From the box, you can see the timing of the 5 rounds of OSOME survey. The sample size, the sample is smaller than that of the ESIEC survey, which is drawn from the registration database, representing all the formal businesses, both in corporations and self-employed business. For the OSOME survey, 40% of them actually are not registered. They are self-employed business, but not registered. Another 50% are the registered self-employed business. Only 10% are the registered corporations. So they represent the micro and small enterprises operating in China. Using the 2 surveys, we can examine the firm dynamics, such as on the exit rate, reopening rate, firm entries, cash flows, major challenges, policy coverages, and so on. So this table is based on a recent article published in China Economic Review. So we used ESIEC February and May surveys to estimate the exit rate right after the lockdown between February and May. The official record registered a very low exit rate as of the end of 2020. The reason is simple, because many firms didn't cancel their registration records, even they stopped running their business. It is quite costly to cancel a business. They have to post an announcement in newspapers, also have to do the accounting audit. So many businesses decide not to cancel the registration formally. So you can see the official record shows the exit rate is very low, only 2.7% for incorporated enterprises, 5.6% for self-employed business. In our February survey, we asked a question: how long can your cash flow last? How many months? And also ask them how long do we expect to reopen? Use those information, we can calculate the predicted exit rate. The rate is much higher. You can see from the second column, 15% for incorporated enterprises, 22% for self-employed business. The last row is based on phone interviews. We called all the previously surveyed firms. Also, we checked all the online informations from other big data. We can impute the actual exit rate. The rate is higher. It's almost 19% for incorporated enterprises, 25% for self-employed business. You can see, indeed, COVID struck a big blow on small businesses. So this the impact on exit rate. We also asked information on reopening rate in February, May, and August. By August, the reopening rate is almost 100%, so I didn't display that. This figure displays the reopening rate by sector, agriculture, manufacturing, business service, residential service, you can see clearly in February, the reopening rate was very low, around 20%. The rate was higher for agriculture and business services, but lower for manufacturing sector and the residential service sector. By May, the reopening rate reached 80%. By August, almost 100%. You can see a clear V-shaped recovery. If we look at the National Business Registration Database, we can also find a V-shaped recovery in firm entries. So this figure is drawn based on the firm entries between 2015 and 2020. We can control for the firm fixed effect of the county fixed effects, year fixed effects, and the monthly fixed effects. We basically compare the year-to-year monthly growth rate. We can see a sharp decline in the first month after lockdown. And then after 2 months, the entry rate returned to normal. So they also display a V-shaped recovery. The surveys also include some questions on the feelings about the COVID, whether the respondents are worried about the COVID or are more optimistic about the future outlook. So this figure shows the two scores, the score of worries and the score of optimism. We can see from February to August, the dark bars indicates a steady decline. The worry score declined from 5.97 to 5.14 between the half-year period. Meanwhile, the optimism score increased from 6 to 6.6, a clear increase. People have become less worried about COVID after China rein the spread of the COVID. In the February round of survey, the respondents reported many challenges. The challenges are evenly distributed across different type of challenges, such as short of cash flow, raw material shortage, labor shortage, short of demand orders, contract break risk, logistic disruptions. You can see that they face all kinds of problems at the same time. By May, the challenge has started to narrow down to demand reduction. The lack of demand emerged as a major challenge by May. Our OSOME survey started in late August last year, all the way to October this year. So we continue to ask the same set of questions. So this figure showed the scores, the share of major challenges reported by the OSOME samples. We can see there are the two major challenges dominant. Lack of demand is one. Another is rising cost, in particular the rising raw material cost. We have breakdown on the cost items. Rising material is the leading one of the rising cost item. So these two almost are evenly distributed as of the latest quarter. In the latest quarter, we found a new challenge. That is the rising policy uncertainty. There's power outage. There's new policies on the platform. There are also the slowdown of the real estate sector. So there are many things happening. So entrepreneurs felt increasing uncertainty in the latest quarter. Our survey also have questions on the policy coverages. So, the questions ranging from like tax rebate, tax cut, financial support, cost reductions, such as rental cost reductions, the deferred payment of the employment social security, etc. So we asked whether a firm received one of this type of policy coverages provided by the government. Also, there's option they receive no policy support at all. Look at the last set of bars, you can see about 40 to 45% of firms never received any policy support. For those received the policy support, the most widely reported one is the tax breaks. This is more inclusive. The second one is financial support. Although the figure looks large, actually, even before the pandemic, our Chinese government provided many types of financial support to businesses. The figure was 14%. So after the massive injection of the fund to the system, the percentage increase only, there were only 2 percentage point increase. Consider the large scale of the support, the impact actually is quite minimal. Our survey also has information on firm size, that is the number of employees. So we can compare the coverage of the policies by firm size. A clear pattern emerges. That is, the larger the firm, the more likely it will receive government policy support. For those without any employees, like the self-employed businesses, the tax breaks coverage rate is only 16%. So you can see much lower than those firms with more than 20 employees. That is 34%. Besides government support, business also have many ways to cope with the shocks, such as through clustering or through e-commerce. So in the remaining part of presentation, I will talk about the resilience part, how firms respond to the shocks. So what we found in our survey is that firms in areas with high degree of clustering perform better. They are more likely to stay open. They have better cash flow status, etc. In the baseline survey, we have questions on the supply chain, a set of supply chain questions, such as whether it has local stable supplies, customers, whether they extend or receive credit, whether they have online sales, whether they have innovations, the degree, the share of local workers, and also inventories. So using the baseline survey, we know prior to the pandemic, firms in clusters had more local suppliers, more local customers, more innovations, more online sales, more widespread spread use of trade credit, and lower level of inventories. Given these advantages, after the COVID, after the lockdown, there's a lot. Initially, there were logistic disruptions. Firms in clusters enjoy some advantages because they were close to the suppliers and the buyers, and they had more online sales. So we found their firm entries in clusters are less adversely affected than those in areas with less clustered. So this figure use the firm representative base. It's a monthly year-to-year growth rate. You can see before the pandemic, the firm entries in high cluster and low cluster regions didn't show much difference. But in the first months of the lockdown, we see a big decline. But the magnitude of the decline is lower for firms in regions, in high cluster regions than in low cluster regions. the job rate was 67% compared to 74%. There's a 7% difference. If we look at the exit rate, we can also see the exit rate is lower in high cluster regions than in low cluster regions. So basically, there are more entries in high cluster regions and low exit in high cluster regions. After the Chinese lockdown, there were many media reports on the importance of e-commerce. For example, there's a cover story in Times Magazine, Meituan, one of the largest food delivery platform. The story that because of the online food delivery, many restaurants managed to stay in business, even during the national lockdown. So using the ESIEC survey and OSOME survey, we show that e-commerce firms are more resilient during and after the lockdowns, thanks to a few factors. The first is they face more robust demand. Because they are more robust demand, they have better cash flow status. Consequently, they are more likely to remain open during and after the COVID restrictions. And they have more positive business outlook for the remaining year. First, we show the evidence of the robust demand. This is the national figure, from the National Bureau of Statistics. The top line reports the offline consumption growth rate, year-to-year growth rate. It's the weekly numbers. Growth rate. After the lockdown, the dashed line, both lines display decline, but the magnitude is much bigger for the offline consumption growth rate. The offline consumption rate didn't recover until the most recent months. But for the online retail and services, we can see the growth rate only dropped slightly to below zero in the first months of the lockdown. But after that, it returned to the positive territory. So this means the online demand has been rather stable, but the offline demand have been slowing down. So that has consequence on the e-commerce businesses. So we can run regressions to show that firms with the previous e-commerce sales are more likely to much less likely to report a demand side challenge in February, May, or August. We can also put the three rounds together that as shown in the first column. You see the correlation is negative. So this is consistent with observations. And then also they have better cash flows. So that the dependent variable is the dummy variable, whether the firm reported to have cash flow more than 1 month. You can see definitely there's a positive correlation between previous e-commerce sales and the subsequent cash flows after the COVID. In addition, e-commerce firms are more likely to stay open and hold more optimistic growth outlook. The top panel is for reopen status. The bottom panel is for growth outlook. You can see the coefficient is positive and significant for the May round and August round of regressions, also for the port panel. But in the May round of survey, because that's right after the ending of the national lockdown, many firms are still closed. So the coefficient is positive, but not significant. the lockdown also provide opportunity for firms to transform. We can look at two margins. One is the extensive margin, that is the new entrants, to see whether the new entries are more likely to be e-commerce firms. We can also look at the intensive margin, that is existing firms, whether they have adjusted their operations to do more online businesses. The firm registration database has a component, business operation scope. Firms need to report their major activities. So we can keep track of the keywords, whether the business scope include information related to e-commerce activities. If they include such information, we can classify them as e-commerce firms. So use that information as an outcome variable, we can see the impact of lockdowns on e-commerce entries. So this is the equations of the event study. Basically, we are looking at the month-to-month growth rate by comparing the year of 2000 with the previous year. So the dashed line, the time of lockdown, we can see before the lockdown, there was almost no difference between the e-commerce firms and the non-e-commerce firms. But after lockdown, we see a clear decline in new entries in e-commerce firms and non-e-commerce firms. But the magnitude of decline for e-commerce firms is smaller, about 9% lower than non-e-commerce firms. Second month after lockdown, we can see the e-commerce firms' growth rate become positive, even compared to the pre-pandemic. So by the end, after 1 year of the lockdown, we can see the e-commerce firms' growth rate, entry rate, remain a very high rate, more than 100%. We can also look at the impact on intensive margin. So we check whether the business have altered their business operation scope to include e-commerce related activities or other activities. We can use that as an outcome variable. So this figure repeats the previous exercise by using, but this is for the incumbent firms. The pattern is very similar for the entrants. We can see the initial drop in number of incumbent firms with scope adjusted, and then a quick rebound. And the rebound is faster for e-commerce than for non-e-commerce firms. After the ending of the national lockdown, China still experienced some sporadic outbreaks of COVID. There are localized lockdowns. So we can use the OSOME survey to track the impact of these localized lockdowns on the subsequent digital transformation. So we count the localized lockdowns at the city level. We know their exact timing and the locations. We can match the information with the OSOME survey, the 5-round OSOME survey. We can see after the localized lockdown, whether firms are more likely to have online operations, whether pure online operation or combined online and offline operations. We can also look at the share of online sales. So this table reports the regression exercise. We can see the coefficient is positive for all the 4 outcome variables, and whether they have online operations or share of online sales. Definitely, exposure to localized lockdown have a positive impact on the introduction of e-commerce later on. So that's a positive news. The crisis begets opportunities for firms to adopt more digital technologies. So let me conclude. Basically, we found COVID shock struck a big blow on SMEs. After COVID was under control, business have rebounded. But policy coverage rate for SMEs is rather low. providing income support to the vulnerable population in area with localized lockdowns probably will indirect benefit more to SMEs, because lack of demand is a leading challenge for SMEs. But right now, most policies in China target on the supply side, which are less efficient. Also, we found firms are quite resilient. In particular, firms in a high cluster area are least affected by COVID shocks. E-commerce has provided SMEs with the edge in coping with the pandemic shocks by buffering demand shock and the cash flow crunch. As a result, both new entries and incumbents have increasingly embraced e-commerce during and after COVID restrictions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Xiaobo. Unfortunately, it's past 4 already, so we need to make sure that our next speaker has enough time to present his talk. But I just wanted to ask one quick question. You have so many waves already, and it looks like, well, I'm not going to ask suggestively, are you going to be collecting another wave soon of the questionnaire?
Yes, all some surveys are ongoing. We are going to do the quarterly survey, I think for maybe next 10 years. As well, we sign an agreement with Ant Group. So can you do that? For the ESIEC survey, we are going to do that yearly survey. We are going to do another round survey next August. But that's too costly. We have to send the numerator to the field. The online survey is less costly. Yeah. So the online survey is a quarterly survey. The ESIEC survey will be annually. Last year was special. We did 3-round phone interviews, but this took a lot of resources to do that.
No, but I guess it's something that we'll have to get used to, that some of these surveys will happen on a more regular basis. Thank you very much, Xiaobo.